Imagine this. You're scrolling through your feed and you see a headline that completely goes against what you believe. Maybe it's about climate change, or nutrition, or politics. You glance at it, maybe you even click on it, but within seconds, your brain whispers, "That can't be right," and you move on. This isn't laziness or ignorance. It's not that people don't care about truth. It's something far deeper, a psychological reflex that protects our sense of identity. Today we're going to explore why we ignore facts that don't fit our beliefs, and what's really happening inside the mind when we do. Let's start with the basics. Human brains are not built for pure logic, they're built for survival. Tens of thousands of years ago, it wasn't about who had the most accurate worldview. It was about who could stay alive, who could stay accepted by the tribe. If your group believed that the gods lived in the mountains, it didn't matter if that was true or not. What mattered was that you believed it too. Disagreeing meant rejection. And rejection back then could mean death. That ancient wiring is still with us. When you encounter a fact that challenges your beliefs, your brain doesn't see information. It sees threat. A threat to your worldview. A threat to your identity. And identity matters more to the brain than accuracy. There's a famous term for this, cognitive dissonance, coined by the psychologist Leon Festinger in the 1950s. It describes the mental tension we feel when two ideas conflict. For example, if you believe you're a good driver but you just caused an accident, that feels uncomfortable. Your mind scrambles to reduce that tension. You might blame the other driver, or the weather, or bad luck. Anything but your own mistake. The same thing happens with beliefs. When new facts clash with what we already think, our brain doesn't calmly evaluate them. It twists, bends, and filters the information until the discomfort goes away. In 2006, researchers at Emory University used fMRI scans to observe what happens when people are presented with political statements that contradict their opinions. The results were striking. When participants saw information that challenged their candidate, the logical reasoning parts of their brain, like the prefrontal cortex, stayed quiet. But the emotional areas, especially those tied to identity and reward, lit up instead. And when they found a way to dismiss the evidence, their brain's reward centers actually activated, releasing dopamine. In other words, it feels good to be right, even when we're wrong. That's confirmation bias in action, our tendency to seek information that supports what we already believe and ignore what doesn't. It's why someone who believes a certain diet works will find dozens of success stories online, but conveniently skip over the scientific reviews showing mixed results. It's why a person convinced that vaccines are dangerous will scroll past 10 peer-reviewed studies and stop at one blog that reinforces their view. Now, you might think this only happens to other people, but studies show that everyone, even trained scientists, fall into this trap. In one experiment, psychologists Peter Wasson and Philip Johnson Laird asked participants to test a simple rule about numbers. Almost everyone tried to confirm the rule instead of testing ways to disprove it. Even when the task was simple logic, the bias for confirmation over contradiction was overwhelming. So why does the mind work like this? Because beliefs are more than just opinions. They're part of our psychological home. They make the world feel stable. They help us predict what's safe, what's dangerous, who's trustworthy. When a fact threatens that structure, the brain treats it like an intruder. It activates the same stress responses that evolved to handle danger. The amygdala, our fear center, starts firing. Cortisol levels rise. We feel discomfort, even anger. And to relieve that stress, we reject the fact, not the belief. Think of it like mental immune defense. Just as the body fights off viruses to stay healthy, the brain fights off information that feels threatening to its worldview. It's not rational, but it's protective. Social influence also makes this stronger. We don't just believe things privately, we believe as groups. When your peers, family, or community share a belief, that belief becomes part of your belonging. Changing your mind can mean losing connection, and for most people, belonging feels more crucial than truth. A 2021 study from Yale showed that when people were paid to give accurate answers about politically charged topics, their bias dropped significantly. That means they could think accurately. They just usually don't, because accuracy often costs social comfort. Let's look at a modern example. Imagine someone who's deeply invested in a cryptocurrency community. They've spent years reading about it, talking about it, maybe even building their identity around it. Then a report comes out showing that large amounts of energy are being wasted, or that certain coins are manipulated by a few big players. That fact doesn't just challenge an opinion, It threatens their sense of belonging and self-worth. So instead of integrating the new information, the mind finds reasons to reject it. The study's flawed. The media is biased. The researchers don't understand technology. And just like that, the belief survives. This isn't stupidity. It's emotional logic. The brain protects consistency because inconsistency feels unsafe. Now, here's something fascinating. The smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing your own biases. A 2019 study by Dan Kahan at Yale found that people with higher analytical skills weren't necessarily less biased. They were often more biased when the topic touched their identity. In other words, intelligence doesn't always bring objectivity. It can make us better at defending our illusions. So, does that mean we're doomed to ignore inconvenient facts forever? Not quite. The first step is awareness. Knowing that your brain is wired this way doesn't instantly fix it, but it gives you a small window of choice. Next time you feel that flash of defensiveness, that "no way, that's wrong" reaction, pause. Ask yourself, what if this is partly true? What if I'm missing something? That moment of curiosity interrupts the automatic defense. Even a few seconds of openness can change how your brain processes the information. Researchers at Stanford found that people who were trained to think about how they might be wrong were significantly more likely to revise their views later. It's called consider the opposite thinking. Simple, but powerful. Another strategy is exposure to diverse perspectives, not as arguments, but as stories. When we hear facts as narratives, they feel less threatening. For example, if you believe a certain policy harms people, reading a dry report about it won't move you. But hearing a real person's story, hearing emotion, hearing context, that can open empathy before your brain's defenses rise up. That's why conversations matter more than debates. Debates trigger ego. Conversations trigger connection. Let's take a small, real-world story. In 2017, a researcher named David Brookman conducted a study on transgender rights. Instead of arguing facts, volunteers simply talked with voters, sharing personal stories, listening without judgment. After just one conversation, people's attitudes shifted measurably, and the change lasted months. Facts alone rarely do that. But empathy can. Now, it's tempting to think, well, other people need to be more open-minded. But remember, everyone sees themselves as the reasonable one. Bias is invisible from the inside. So if you really want to challenge your own mind, try this simple exercise. Think of one belief you hold very strongly, maybe about health, politics, or human nature. Then, spend 10 minutes reading the best, most reasoned arguments on the opposite side. Not the extreme ones, but the thoughtful ones. Notice how your body reacts: tension, irritation, maybe even anger. That's cognitive dissonance in real time. And sitting with it, without pushing it away, is mental strength training. Another way to soften bias is through humility, not in the moral sense, but in the cognitive sense. Psychologists call it intellectual humility. It's the awareness that your knowledge is always incomplete and that reality is more complex than your mind wants it to be. A 2020 study from Duke University found that people high in intellectual humility were much better at evaluating evidence objectively, even on emotionally charged topics. They were also less likely to share misinformation online. So humility isn't weakness. It's a mental immune system upgrade. It lets you absorb new information without feeling attacked. But here's the paradox. Our culture often rewards certainty, not curiosity. Social media algorithms promote confidence, outrage, and simplicity, not nuance. Posts that declare, "this is the truth," get more engagement than those that say, "I might be wrong." And every time we engage with content that confirms our biases, the algorithm gives us more of the same. That creates echo chambers, digital worlds where we see only the beliefs we already hold. In 2022, researchers from MIT analyzed millions of tweets and found that false political news spread 6 times faster than true news. Why? Because false stories often fit our existing narratives better. They trigger emotion, not reflection. So, in a way, the online world amplifies our natural bias. And if we're not careful, it can trap us in mental bubbles. But there's hope here, too. Some platforms are experimenting with diversity of information prompts, gentle reminders that encourage users to read from multiple sources. Preliminary tests show these small nudges can reduce polarization and misinformation sharing by up to 15%. It's not huge, but it's a start. Still, the real change begins inside each of us. When you notice yourself rejecting a fact because it just doesn't feel right, pause. Ask, am I protecting truth or protecting identity? That small question can open a door. Let's imagine another example. Say you've always believed that multitasking makes you productive. Then you read that numerous studies, like the one from Stanford showing multitasking reduces efficiency by up to 40%, say the opposite. At first, you'll want to dismiss it. Maybe you'll say, well, that study doesn't apply to me. But if you pause and test it, maybe by focusing on one task for a day, you might notice your mind feels clearer. That's how belief change actually happens. Not through force, but through gentle experimentation. And sometimes, change comes from unexpected emotions. Shame and defensiveness block learning, but curiosity and wonder invite it. When you approach new facts with curiosity, your brain releases dopamine, the same chemical that powers motivation. So instead of thinking, oh no, I was wrong, you can think, that's interesting. Quote, that small emotional shift rewires how your brain treats information. Even teachers and therapists use this principle. When helping clients challenge harmful beliefs, like I'm worthless or people can't be trusted, they don't flood them with counter-evidence. They create safety first. Because only when the emotional brain feels safe does the logical brain open up. The same is true for any belief, personal or political. Let's make this personal for a moment. Think about a time when you changed your mind about something big. Maybe you once thought a person couldn't change, but then you saw someone you love grow in ways you didn't expect. Or maybe you doubted therapy until you tried it yourself. Notice what allowed that shift. It probably wasn't just facts. It was experience, trust, and emotion working together. That's the secret. Facts need emotional bridges. Without them, they bounce off like pebbles on armor. Now, here's a final perspective. The goal isn't to eliminate bias. That's impossible. The goal is to become aware of it, to hold beliefs lightly, to let curiosity breathe. Imagine your beliefs as tools, not treasures. You can use them, refine them, even replace them when they stop working. That flexibility is what keeps the mind alive. And when we learn to see our own blind spots, empathy grows. We stop treating disagreement as an attack and start treating it as a chance to understand another version of reality. That's not weakness. That's maturity. So next time you stumble on a fact that doesn't fit your beliefs, don't scroll past it. Pause. Let the discomfort sit there for a moment. Ask yourself, what would it mean if this were true? You don't have to agree, just explore. Because the more you practice that, the less your beliefs own you, and the more you own them. And if you enjoy exploring how the mind really works, slowly, thoughtfully, one layer at a time, remember to subscribe to Tortoise Brain. Because understanding your mind isn't about collecting facts, it's about learning to see truth, even when it disagrees with you. The next time someone shows you evidence that challenges what you think, you'll feel that flicker of resistance. That's normal. But maybe, just maybe, you'll take a breath and listen anyway. And that's how change begins. Not with a new fact, but with the courage to let one in. Because truth isn't a destination. It's a relationship, one that grows stronger every time you dare to question yourself.